Welcome to the petty capital of planet Earth, the HOA. Tonight it's 69 real complaints, actually filed, by neighbors who treat leaf blowers like war crimes and wind chimes like propaganda. No courtroom reenactments, no filler. Just weaponized pettiness, forensic nonsense, and suburban poetry so absurd it should need a permit. Ready to feel sane by comparison? Let's start. 1. A homeowner in Florida received a formal, multi-page complaint from a neighbor about their wind chimes. It wasn't about the volume. The complaint meticulously argued that the chimes had an aggressively cheerful tone that was a sonic assault of forced happiness. The neighbor, who practiced silent meditation, claimed the gentle tinkling was actively disrupting their spiritual journey and demanded the homeowner replace them with something more sonically neutral, whatever that means. 2. In a pristine Arizona suburb, a family was fined after a neighbor filed a complaint about the color of their children's new backyard playset. The problem wasn't the structure itself, but its egregiously bright yellow slide. The complaint letter stated the color was a beacon of tacky disregard for community aesthetics, and claimed it was so vibrant it was giving the neighbors' prize-winning roses a psychological complex, causing them to wilt in protest. 3. A resident in a Virginia townhome community was formally warned after their next-door neighbor complained about the smell of them cooking garlic. The neighbor didn't claim an allergy. They claimed the pungent and frankly aggressive aroma was a form of olfactory assault. They insisted the smell was seeping through the shared wall and spiritually tainting their home, forcing them to perform an energetic cleanse with sage every time the person made pasta sauce. 4. One homeowner got a violation notice because of their flock of plastic pink flamingos. The neighbor's complaint wasn't that the flamingos existed, but that their arrangement was menacing. The neighbor alleged that the homeowner was moving the flamingos into different formations each night, claiming it was a passive-aggressive flamingo-based psychological operation, specifically designed to mock the way they parked their car. 5. In California, an HOA board had to seriously deliberate a complaint against a homeowner's welcome mat. The mat in question simply said, "Hi, I'm Matt." The complaining neighbor argued that the attempt at lowbrow humor lowered the neighborhood's intellectual and aesthetic tone. They claimed the pun promoted a casual and flippant attitude that was, and I quote, "detrimental to the formal character we are trying to uphold." 6. A man in North Carolina was ordered to remove his bird feeder following a neighbor's complaint. The issue? It was attracting the wrong kind of birds. The neighbor stated that the feeder's cheap seed mix was luring avian riffraff like grackles and starlings, while their own expensive feeder was designed for prestigious birds like cardinals. The complaint demanded action before the lower-class birds started influencing the property values. 7. An elderly woman in a retirement community filed a complaint against her neighbor's reflective garden globe. She claimed the gazing ball, as it's called, was not a decoration but a sophisticated surveillance device. She submitted hand-drawn diagrams, complete with sun angle calculations, to prove that the neighbor had strategically placed it to spy directly into her kitchen and steal her prized cookie recipes. 8. A family in Texas received a formal warning for unauthorized sidewalk art. Their 7-year-old daughter had drawn a large, lopsided purple dinosaur in chalk on the public walkway. The neighbor who reported it cited the drawing as unapproved graffiti and described it in the official complaint as a disturbing depiction of a mutated creature that could potentially frighten smaller children and attract actual lizards. 9. The sound of a garage door opening led to an official complaint in an Ohio subdivision. The neighbor didn't complain about the time or the frequency. They complained about the tone of the sound. It was described as a low, mournful groan, reminiscent of a dying whale, which was emotionally draining to hear every morning. The HOA formally requested the homeowner lubricate the tracks for the sake of the community's mental well-being. 10. A homeowner received a fine in July because of a complaint about their holiday decorations. The decoration in question? a single 6-foot strand of white Christmas lights that was still wrapped around a small bush near their front door. The neighbor who filed the complaint called it a blatant disregard for the Gregorian calendar and an act of seasonal rebellion that was creating temporal confusion throughout the neighborhood. 11. In a quiet Colorado community, a homeowner was hit with a complaint over their manatee-shaped mailbox. The neighbor's issue wasn't that it violated size or color regulations, but that the manatee's facial expression was, and this is a direct quote, unacceptably passive and dopey. The complaining party argued that its lazy, whimsical smile projected an image of apathy and undermined the neighborhood's reputation for go-getters and high achievers. 12. A family in Georgia had to defend themselves against a complaint regarding the shadow cast by their son's basketball hoop. The neighbor, an avid lawn care enthusiast, claimed the hoop's shadow fell across their prize-winning patch of zoysia grass for precisely 2 hours and 15 minutes every afternoon. This, they argued, was depriving that specific patch of critical photosynthesis time, causing it emotional distress and stunting its growth potential. 13. One of the most bizarre complaints came from a resident who demanded their neighbor install wind chimes. Their reasoning was that the neighbor's aggressive and profound silence was creating a sonic void on their side of the property line. This lack of ambient noise was, according to the complaint, making their own home feel oppressively quiet, which in turn forced them to confront their own thoughts more often than they were comfortable with. 14. A complaint was filed against a woman's toy poodle, not for barking or making a mess, but for its wardrobe. The neighbor alleged that the dog's collection of flamboyant and suggestive outfits, including a tiny faux leather jacket and a sequin sweater, was inappropriate for a family-oriented community. The letter went on to state that the dog's attire set a morally ambiguous precedent for local pets and was a visual nuisance. 15. An HOA in Illinois had to mediate a dispute over lawn mowing patterns. A new resident preferred to mow his lawn in a swirling, spiral pattern instead of traditional straight lines. His neighbor filed a formal complaint, stating that the chaotic and non-linear grass arrangement was a visual representation of anarchy that was deeply disturbing to their sense of order and gave them a feeling of vertigo when they looked at it for too long. 16. A resident in a meticulously planned community in Florida received a violation notice regarding the color temperature of their front porch light bulb. The neighbor complained that the homeowner was using a cool white 4000K bulb, which emitted a sterile hospital-like glow. This, they claimed, disrupted the street's carefully curated, warm and welcoming ambiance, which could only be achieved with bulbs in the 2700K warm white range. 17. A man on a strict diet filed a formal grievance against his neighbor for olfactory harassment. The issue was the smell of the neighbor's frequent barbecuing. The complaint didn't mention smoke. It focused on the seductively savory aroma of grilled meats. He claimed the smell was a deliberate and malicious act of dietary sabotage, designed to torment him and derail his weight loss journey by making him crave brisket. 18. A homeowner was formally blamed for the attitude of the local squirrels. A neighbor submitted a complaint alleging that the homeowner's premium brand of birdseed in their feeder was making the squirrels unusually aggressive and entitled. The letter claimed the high-energy nut and sunflower mix was turning them into hyper-caffeinated furry thugs, who now had the audacity to taunt their indoor cat through the window. 19. When a homeowner bought a brand new lime green sports car, their neighbor immediately filed a complaint. Since the HOA had no rules against specific car colors, the neighbor got creative. They claimed the car's paint was so aggressively vibrant and reflective that on sunny afternoons, the glare coming off the hood was a blinding visual hazard that made it impossible to enjoy their front porch without protective eyewear. 20. A family was cited after a neighbor complained about their children's trampoline. The complaint wasn't about noise or safety. It was that the neighbor could see the children's heads bobbing up and down over the top of the 6-foot privacy fence as they jumped. This unpredictable rhythmic popping was, they wrote, extremely distracting and visually unsettling, giving them a mild form of motion sickness while trying to read in their yard. 21. A homeowner installed a brand new, top-of-the-line video doorbell. A week later, a complaint arrived from next door. The issue wasn't privacy or the camera's field of view. It was the default chime. The neighbor deemed the standard ding-dong sound to be insultingly generic and lacking in sophistication. The complaint suggested a home of that stature deserved a more melodic, multitonal chime befitting its architectural gravitas. 22. A complaint was filed in early November regarding a homeowner's large, inflatable Thanksgiving turkey decoration. The neighbor who reported it cited two issues. First, the turkey's cartoonishly cheerful demeanor was historically insensitive. Second, the way the inflatable wobbled and swayed in the wind gave it an air of unwarranted smugness that seemed to be mocking their own, more traditional autumn wreath display. 23. An Alabama resident was formally warned after flying a flag for his favorite college football team, the Auburn Tigers. The complaint was filed by his neighbor, a die-hard University of Alabama fan. He argued in his letter that the flag's presence was not a simple display of team spirit but a deliberate act of visual taunting and a form of psychological warfare that created a hostile and unsportsmanlike living environment every Saturday during the fall. 24. A homeowner in a pristine Arizona community was issued a warning after a neighbor complained their rain gutters were too clean. The complaining neighbor stated that the gleaming, immaculate condition of the gutters was a form of passive-aggressive home maintenance shaming. They argued it set an impossibly high standard for the rest of the block and made their own. Perfectly functional gutters looked neglected by comparison. 25. A family received a formal complaint about a bumper sticker on their minivan. The sticker didn't say anything political or offensive. It simply read, "My child is an honor student at Northwood Elementary." The neighbor who filed the complaint claimed the sticker was a form of blatant intellectual bragging that fostered a hyper-competitive and toxic academic environment among neighborhood children before they had even reached middle school. 26. The specific sound of a lawn sprinkler led to an official HOA dispute in Texas. The neighbor's complaint was that the sprinkler's rhythm was sonically erratic and displeasing. They provided a written transcript of the sound, describing it as a chaotic ch-ch-ch squeak, which they claimed was disrupting their ability to concentrate, unlike their own sprinkler, which operated with a predictable metronome-like precision. 27. A woman was ordered to reposition her garden gnomes after a neighbor filed a formal complaint. The issue wasn't the gnomes' existence, but their line of sight. The neighbor insisted the gnomes were arranged in a way that made them appear to be staring judgmentally at their prize-winning petunias. This, they claimed, was giving the flowers performance anxiety and causing their blooms to be less vibrant than in previous years. 28. One of the strangest complaints involved the simple act of taking in the trash cans after pickup. A resident complained that their neighbor did the chore with an unsettling amount of enthusiasm. They described how the neighbor would triumphantly wheel the empty bins back to the garage, turning a mundane task into a weekly celebratory spectacle that was both loud and, for reasons they couldn't explain, deeply unnerving. 29. An official complaint was filed against a homeowner's cat. The cat wasn't trespassing or making noise. The problem was that it would sit in a second-story window and stare down into the neighbor's yard. The complaint alleged the cat's gaze was filled with an aura of condescension and silent mockery, making the neighbor feel judged for everything from their choice of lawn furniture to their questionable weeding technique. 30. A homeowner painted their front door a tasteful dark navy blue, only to receive a complaint from next door. The neighbor didn't argue that the color was unapproved, but that it was psychologically overbearing. The formal letter stated that the bold, decisive, and unapologetic hue projected a personality of extreme confidence that was disrupting the humble, suburban harmony of the street. They suggested a more agreeable beige. 31. After a family planted a new maple tree in their backyard, their neighbor filed a complaint citing unauthorized alteration of local wind patterns. The neighbor, who was very serious, claimed the tree's placement was now illegally redirecting the prevailing afternoon breeze away from their patio. This act of breeze theft, they argued, was diminishing their quality of life by rendering their decorative windsock completely useless. 32. A complaint was lodged against a homeowner for their choice of grocery bags. The neighbor took issue with the fact that the person exclusively used reusable bags adorned with obnoxiously virtuous, eco-friendly slogans. They claimed that watching the neighbor unload bags saying, "Save the planet," and "Choose to reuse," was a form of silent, sanctimonious preaching that made them feel personally attacked for their own life choices. 33. A resident was cited for their solar-powered pathway lights being insufficiently aspirational. The complaining neighbor argued that the feeble, pathetic glow emitted by the small lights created a depressing and melancholic nighttime ambiance. The complaint suggested this lack of luminous ambition reflected poorly on the entire street and demanded they be replaced with a brighter, more optimistic lighting solution. 34. A man's morning jogging routine became the subject of an HOA complaint. His neighbor filed a report claiming his 6 a.m. run was aggressively cheerful. The complaint detailed his excessively bouncy stride and ridiculously joyful waving as a tyrannical display of morning person energy. The neighbor stated it felt like a personal attack on their own, more subdued, coffee-fueled start to the day. 35. An otherwise perfect homeowner was written up because of his barbecue grill cover. The neighbor who complained didn't have an issue with the grill itself, but with the faded generic vinyl cover he used. The complaint described it as a sad, shapeless shroud that was a symbol of culinary apathy. They argued that a high-end grill deserved a bespoke, form-fitting cover, and that the current situation disrespected the very concept of barbecue. 36. A complaint was filed over a decorative rain chain that a homeowner had installed in place of a traditional downspout. The neighbor argued that the gentle, meditative tinkling sound the chain made during a storm was a pretentious attempt to turn a simple weather event into a spa-like Zen experience. This, they claimed, clashed horribly with the more honest, guttural, and working-class sound of their own traditional gutter system. 37. A homeowner received a complaint about the pattern of their new architectural roof shingles. The neighbor wasn't contesting the color or material. Their issue was with the random, haphazard placement of the shingles, which they claimed created a visually chaotic and stressful mosaic. The formal letter argued that this lack of a predictable pattern was a subconscious assault on the neighborhood's sense of order and was negatively affecting their personal feng shui. 38. In an upscale retirement community, a resident was reported to the HOA board over the name of his new golden retriever. The dog's name was Captain. The complaining neighbor, a retired naval officer, filed a multi-page grievance claiming that bestowing a military rank upon a canine was a flagrant act of stolen valor. He insisted it was deeply disrespectful to everyone who has ever earned their commission, and demanded the dog be renamed to something more civilian appropriate. 39. A family installed new energy-efficient windows, and within a week, their neighbor filed a complaint. The issue was the sun's reflection. The neighbor claimed that for exactly 17 minutes every afternoon, the glare from the new window created a concentrated solar beam that shot directly into their living room. They included a diagram proving this beam was hitting their wall-mounted thermostat, overheating it, and causing their air conditioning to run non-stop. 40. A woman who enjoyed gardening was fined after a neighbor complained about her watering can. The bright pink plastic can was left on her front porch, and the complaint stated its aggressively synthetic and unnatural hue was a stain on the community's organic aesthetic. The letter went on to bizarrely claim that the neon color was visually offensive to local pollinators and could potentially confuse the bees and hummingbirds. 41. An official grievance was filed because a homeowner was leaving their mailbox flag up for too long after the mail had been delivered. The neighbor argued that the upright red flag, visible for hours, created a state of false postal hope for the entire street. They claimed it was emotionally taxing to drive by and see the flag, thinking the mail carrier was late, only to remember it was just a case of blatant mailbox negligence. 42. The smell of laundry became the subject of a formal complaint in a tightly packed townhouse community. A resident complained that their neighbor's dryer vent was emitting an overpoweringly cheerful scent of tropical sunrise fabric softener. They claimed this chemical cloud of manufactured joy was an olfactory invasion that made their own choice to use unscented, eco-friendly detergent feel judged and inadequate. 43. After a homeowner had their driveway professionally resealed, their neighbor complained that it was now too black. The official letter described the pristine asphalt as a menacing, void-like abyss that was aggressively absorbing sunlight. The neighbor claimed this was creating a micro-heat island effect that was raising the ambient temperature on their side of the property line and causing their own faded driveway to feel emotionally insecure. 44. A complaint was filed against a 10-year-old's bicycle. The bike wasn't blocking the sidewalk or in a state of disrepair. The problem, according to the neighbor, was that the child consistently left it parked with the kickstand down at a jaunty and rebellious angle. The complaint seriously argued that this display of casual defiance promoted a lawless, devil-may-care attitude that was a subtle but dangerous influence on the neighborhood's youth. 45. A resident installed a new, sleek, minimalist-style birdhouse in their backyard. This prompted a complaint from their neighbor, an avid birdwatcher, who claimed the cold, brutalist architecture was psychologically unwelcoming to the local bird population. They insisted that birds prefer traditional, rustic, Cape Cod-style dwellings, and that the modern birdhouse was an insult to avian real estate values and would drive the desirable songbirds away. 46. The gentle clinking sound of a flagpole rope led to a formal HOA warning. The complaint wasn't about the flag itself, but the maddeningly inconsistent sound of the metal clasps tapping against the aluminum pole on windy days. The neighbor described it as a form of sonic water torture, arguing that a constant, predictable noise would be preferable to the sporadic, anxiety-inducing metallic pings that shattered their backyard tranquility. 47. A family updated their house numbers with a modern sans serif font, leading to an immediate complaint. The neighbor's letter stated that the cold corporate typography was devoid of personality and warmth, and made their home look less like a residence and more like the branch office of a soulless tech startup. They demanded the numbers be replaced with a more neighborly and emotionally available font, like a classic serif. 48. A musician with perfect pitch filed a complaint against their neighbor's new air conditioning unit. The issue wasn't the volume, but the specific tone of its hum. He claimed the unit produced a persistent and unwavering B-flat, which created a horrific sonic dissonance with the natural C-sharp ambiance of the summer cicadas. This musical clash, he argued, made it impossible for him to relax in his own backyard. 49. A homeowner was reported for their improper weeding technique. The neighbor who filed the complaint was horrified watching them yank dandelions out of their lawn. The letter stated that this aggressive and violent method was unnecessarily traumatic for the surrounding turf and disrupted the soil's delicate microbiome. They seriously suggested the homeowner should adopt a more holistic and respectful approach to weed removal. 50. A resident in a high-end community was cited after their neighbor complained about their new outdoor pizza oven. The issue wasn't smoke or noise. The complaint alleged that the authentic artisanal aroma of wood-fired pizza was a form of culinary elitism. The neighbor argued that the delicious smell wafting over the fence made their own frozen pizzas feel deeply inadequate and created a gastronomic class divide on the block. 51. An official complaint was filed regarding the emotional state of a homeowner's inflatable holiday decoration. It was a 6-foot-tall snowman that, due to a slow leak, would gradually deflate throughout the day, appearing to slump over in a sad, hunched position. The neighbor claimed this depressing and morose spectacle was a visual metaphor for existential despair that was casting a pall of gloom over the entire street's festive spirit. 52. The reflection from a swimming pool became the subject of a formal HOA dispute. A neighbor claimed that the shimmering, dancing light patterns reflected from the pool's surface onto their ceiling in the late afternoon were unbearably distracting. They described the effect as being trapped inside a giant disco ball, which was preventing them from taking a proper nap and was giving their pet cat a mild but persistent form of vertigo. 53. A homeowner received a violation notice because of the type of mulch they used in their flower beds. The neighbor's complaint was that the shockingly red cypress mulch was a garish and unnatural soil covering. The letter argued that its aggressive volcanic hue was a botanical crime that completely overpowered the subtle beauty of the petunias and made the entire garden look like a cheaply decorated Italian restaurant. 54. A complaint was filed against a family's robot vacuum cleaner. The neighbor, who worked from a home office, claimed they could occasionally see the small, autonomous device bumping into the baseboards through the window. They described this as a relentless, Sisyphean display of pointless labor that was profoundly demotivating to watch during their own workday and made them question the very nature of productivity. 55. A resident's choice of outdoor lighting for a backyard party led to an official warning. They had strung up tiki torches, and the neighbor's complaint had nothing to do with fire safety. The complaint stated that the forced and inauthentic Polynesian theme was culturally inappropriate for a landlocked Midwestern suburb. They argued the torches created a tacky, ersatz tropical ambiance that lowered the intellectual and aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. 56. A homeowner who meticulously cared for his lawn was reported for excessive greenness. The neighbor who filed the complaint claimed the lawn was so unnaturally vibrant and uniformly verdant, it looks like a CGI rendering. They argued this hyper-realistic turf created an uncanny valley effect that was visually unsettling and made their own healthy but less perfect lawn look like it was suffering from a chronic illness. 57. A complaint was filed over the sound of a basketball being dribbled, but with a very specific twist. The neighbor claimed that the homeowner's son was only practicing dribbling with his right hand. This sonically monotonous, right-dominant rhythm, the complaint argued, was lacking in ambidextrous complexity and was therefore musically and athletically unsatisfying to listen to. They seriously suggested the boy practice with his left hand to create a more varied and interesting beat. 58. An HOA had to mediate a dispute over a homeowner's front door wreath. The problem? It was a wreath made of seashells, despite the community being over 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean. The neighbor's complaint called it a geographically fraudulent decoration that was perpetuating a coastal fantasy. The letter insisted that seasonal decor should be regionally appropriate and suggested a wreath made of pine cones or wheat stalks instead. 59. A resident was cited for the inappropriate speed of their ceiling fan, which was visible through their front window. The neighbor complained that the fan was perpetually set to its highest speed, creating a frenetic and anxiety-inducing blur of motion. They argued this display of excessive air circulation projected an aura of chaos and desperation that was disrupting the tranquil and leisurely pace of the neighborhood. 60. One of the most detailed complaints was about a small decorative water fountain in a neighbor's garden. The complaining resident submitted audio recordings to the HOA board to prove that the fountain's trickling sound had an aggressive and overly splashy timbre. They claimed the sound was not the gentle, babbling brook advertised on the box, but a relentless, high-frequency splashing that was a mockery of natural water sounds and was slowly driving them insane. 61. A homeowner was formally reprimanded over their car's backup warning beep. The complaint had nothing to do with the volume. The neighbor argued that the gentle, multi-tone chime was excessively polite and almost apologetic, which they found condescending. They claimed a harsher, more industrial beep, beep, beep would be more honest and direct, and that the current sound was a passive-aggressive attempt to sonically gentrify the driveway. 62. An official complaint was lodged against a resident's dog for being too well-behaved. The neighbor, who owned two boisterous and unruly terriers, claimed that watching the other dog sit patiently and never bark was a form of canine good citizen shaming. The letter stated that the dog's impeccable manners were setting an unrealistic and demoralizing standard for other, more spirited pets in the community, causing their own dogs to suffer from performance anxiety. 63. A homeowner's oscillating lawn sprinkler became the center of an HOA investigation. The neighbor's complaint was about its watering pattern. They claimed the sprinkler's wasteful 360-degree full-circle rotation was an arrogant display of hydro-irresponsibility, especially when their own sprinklers used a more conservative and thoughtful back-and-forth arc. They argued the full-circle pattern was an affront to both water conservation and the principles of geometric efficiency. 64. A resident installed a small decorative windmill in their garden, leading to a complaint about unauthorized energy generation. The neighbor, in all seriousness, argued that even though the windmill wasn't connected to anything, it was passively harnessing the community's shared wind resources. They claimed this was atmospheric trespassing, and that the windmill's smug, eco-conscious spinning was a silent judgment on their own gas-powered lawnmower. 65. The simple act of pulling weeds resulted in a formal grievance. A neighbor complained that the homeowner's weeding posture was unsettlingly perfect. They described how the person would kneel on a cushioned pad with a straight, regal back, turning a mundane chore into a flex of ergonomic superiority. The complaint stated this performative gardening was a silent but potent critique of their own, more realistic backbreaking hunch. 66. A complaint was filed over the sound of an automatic ice dispenser. The neighbor alleged that the sudden, violent clatter of ice cubes falling into an empty glass was a startling auditory assault. They described the sound not as a convenience, but as a miniature avalanche occurring without warning, which was shattering the domestic tranquility and causing them to spill their coffee on more than one occasion due to the shock. 67. A new homeowner put up a welcome sign on their porch, and a complaint followed within days. The issue was the punctuation. The neighbor stated that the use of an exclamation point was emotionally aggressive and overly familiar. The letter argued that a simple period would have been more dignified, and that the exclamation point projected a desperate, almost manic need for validation that was unbecoming of the neighborhood's reserved character. 68. A homeowner who prided themselves on precision was reported for their routine of turning on their landscape lights. The neighbor complained that the lights came on at the exact second of astronomical sunset each evening. This tyrannical display of punctuality, they claimed, was unnatural and robotic. It made their own, more casual approach to lighting feel chaotic and undisciplined. And the sheer predictability of the event was, ironically, a constant, irritating surprise. 69. The most abstract complaint of all was filed against a homeowner's newly installed Zen garden. The neighbor claimed the garden was too peaceful. They described it as creating a vortex of extreme tranquility that was siphoning all the ambient chaotic energy from the surrounding properties. The complaint bizarrely concluded that this black hole of calm was making their own, more lively yard feel spiritually drained and profoundly boring by comparison. Admit it. Which complaint would you file if it guaranteed revenge with zero consequences, Be brutally specific. Name the target, the violation, and the ridiculous fine. I'm reading them all. If this tour of weaponized neighborliness made you laugh or rage, hit like so the algorithm hands us more drama, and subscribe so you don't miss the next HOA meltdown.